pleasure for me. I visited Tehran in the 1990s, in the early 1990s, and was fabulously welcomed there when there were very few foreigners. And I've known nothing since then. I've spent a long time in Indonesia, and they made a mistake on the chairing, and they meant to put me to chair the other session. And instead, I get the pleasure of revisiting Tehran, which was a fabulous time. So our first speaker is Yahya Sabbagchi, and he, yes, I've just found out, has been 6 years as assistant professor in the Center for Islamic Studies in Sharif University. His doctorate is in the philosophy of religion, and he has spoken several times in a number of international conferences, this time the first on Zoom, and this is to Balaaghi's responses to Christian missionaries. So the floor is yours, Yahya.
Okay, thank you very much. It's my honor to be here among you all and to participate in this conference. I have to share my screen and yes, I hope I can do it easily. Yes. Okay. Do you see my screen now? Balaaghi and the canonical gospels?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Actually, I have changed the subject of my paper a little bit. This is what Dr. Glazer asked me. My first subject was Balaaghi's responses to the Christian missionaries, but because she wanted me to present a paper more related exactly to the Gospels, I changed a little bit my subject and naturally my paper. So the subject of my paper is Balaaghi and the canonical Gospels. First of all, I should show the picture of Balaaghi, who is a Shiite scholar, Islamic scholar in Iraq around 1 century ago. And my paper is actually a kind of a case study. I want to talk about what Balaaghi has written about Christianity as a Muslim scholar. I have organized my paper in 3 sections. First, an introduction. Second, Balaaghi's reviews on the canonical Gospels. And finally, conclusion and my own reviews on the subject. So, I have to talk about 4 points in my introduction. First of all, we need to know Balaaghi's era, Balaaghi's age. He lived actually in colonial age. Some parts of his lifetime, of course, was in colonial age, and mostly English and French governments have entered some Eastern countries, including some Muslim countries, and including Iraq that Balaaghi lived in. And following this colonialism, several Christian missionaries had entered Muslim countries like Iraq. So Balaaghi confronted a new situation in comparison with his previous colleagues, and so he decided to write some books regarding the new situation. The new situation is what Christian missionaries produced. That is, they obviously tried to preach Christianity, they tried to propagate Christianity, and of course some of them started to criticize Islam, criticize the Prophet of Islam. As you know, And this is the atmosphere of the interface relations between Islam and Christianity 1 century ago and before that. And it's obvious that our situation and our atmosphere is really different from what we can find 1 century ago. So this is a short introduction to the era of Balaaghi. Then I want to talk about shortly about Balaaghi's works. As much as we know, 41 books and treatises was written by Balaaghi. Among them, 16 are printed. And the outstanding point about Balaaghi is that 1/3 of his writings are about Christianity, which shows that he had focused greatly on Christianity because of special situation that he was in. For example, I want to introduce some of his books shortly. For example, Al-Huda ila Din al-Mustafa, which means guidance toward the religion of Muhammad, has been written in response to a book called the Book of Guidance, which was propagating Christianity and criticizing Islam, and also in response to a book by George Sale, which his translation of the Quran may be known. And this book, Al-Huda ila Din al-Mustafa, was a response to those books. Or another book, At-Tawhid at-Tathlith, means monotheism and Trinity, is again a response to an anonymous writer who wrote a letter to Balaaghi and invited him to be a Christian. And he mentions that if I knew the writer of the letter, I would respond just to him or her. But because I don't know who is the writer, I publish my responses. And again, another book which I have mostly used, this final book, is called Al-Madrasa As-Sayyara, means the moving school. And here in this book, Balaaghi depicts a dialogue among 3 Christian people, Emmanuel, Eliezer, if I pronounce it correctly, and a priest without any name, just a priest. And they talk about different subjects of Christianity, including canonical gospels. And I want to give a report about what Balaaghi says about canonical gospels in the form of a dialogue between these 3 people. However, point 3 of my introduction. Balaaghi has some assumption. Among them, we should notice that and keep in mind that Balaaghi is a devoted Muslim. He believes in superiority of Islam. He believes in the divinity of Christianity, and also he believes in a book by Jesus Christ, as the Quran says, Injil. So this structure of beliefs is important to know Balaaghi and Balaaghi's own viewpoints. But when he talks about Christianity, he tries to adopt a dialectic approach, means that he accepts the divinity of the canonical gospels and all the books in the Bible, and tries now to show some problems, some failures, and so on. And another part of his approach is that he usually refers to the original text. Rarely he goes to the writings of Christian scholars. He goes directly to the Bible. And my final point in my introduction is that if we can make an image of the circumstances in which Balaaghi lived, we can find out that Balaaghi's concern is, Balaaghi's problem is not comparative study or historical study of Christianity. He has one distinct and clear goal, that is defending Islam against criticisms which are being made by some Christian missionaries. He writes somewhere that ships of Christian books are nowadays entering Iraq. Okay, so I should again repeat that I'm going to do a case study. Not all of what I'm talking about is necessarily my own opinion, because Balaaghi is going to, as I will talk about, is going to review some points about canonical gospels. Okay. To be honest, Balaaghi has a main idea. That is, the canonical gospels are not as they are described. Means that Balaaghi does not believe in the divinity of the gospels, but as I told before, he adopts a dialectic approach. Now I want to go to the second part of my paper and talk about Balaaghi's reviews on the canonical gospels. I would like to interpret his views, his reviews actually, in 4 steps. In the first step, he talks about the others of the gospels and raise a question: who are the others of the canonical gospels? And the main point in his view is that there are several blames and rebukes by Jesus Christ about the apostles. And then he shows some cases that I will show again in my next slides. And finally, he argues that how can a great religion like Christianity rely on writings by some people who are blamed in several positions by Jesus Christ? This is his argument, his review in the first step. And some of the evidences that he wants to show is as follows, and you can see. For example, Jesus calls the apostles little faith, or you have no faith, or so on, faithless and perverse generation, who don't have faith as a grain of mustard seed. These are, between the quotation marks, these are actually got from the text of Gospels. Or another case that he points out is that the apostles saw Jesus walking on the water surface, but they thought it was a ghost. And then quotes a sentence from Mark: "For they considered not the miracle of the loaves, for their heart was hardened." And again, yes, Jesus requested from the apostles to remain with him that night, but they left him alone in his sadness. When the Jews attacked him, they all escaped, leaving him with his enemies, from Matthew. I think one or two other narrations, the apostles disbelieved. This is an important part of his argument, I think. He says that the apostles were not like other people because they had seen different and several miracles by Jesus. And it is expected from them to accept what Jesus had said to them. Then he says that the apostles disbelieved those women who informed them that they had seen the Christ resurrecting from the dead. And their words seemed to them as idle tales, and they believed them not. And blames actually the apostles that why they didn't believe in what those women said, and because it is important because Jesus had told them, actually had foretold them that he would rise from the dead after 3 days, but the apostles did not believe in. And finally, Saint Peter also denied the appointment of that night 3 times and shouted and swore that he knew nothing about this man called Jesus, as we all know. This has, okay, so he makes an argument. That is, there are some blames by Jesus against the apostles, and how can we rely on their writings? Finally, in this step, he says that Balaaghi mentions actually the order by Jesus after his resurrection to the apostles, to go and preach people and teach them how to practice Christianity. And maybe he means that someone can say that although Jesus had blamed some apostles, but this order shows that Jesus had confirmed them finally. So Balaaghi goes to the second step of his reviews. That is, assuming Christ's request from the apostles after his resurrection to preach and teach people, what can validate the writings of Luke and Mark while they were not apostles? And here he tries to talk especially about Luke and Mark. Actually, he believes that if we want to rely on the writings of Luke and Mark, we should have a special sign. That sign may be a complete confirmation by Jesus, or a miracle, or an explicit evidence of inspiration by the Holy Spirit. This is what Balaaghi raises and says that if you want a kind of a special sign of these kinds, we then can rely on their writings. And then he tries to show that we have no sign of these kinds. For example, he mentions that the Holy Book did not refer whether Luke and Mark were among the 100 persons who, as Acts say, were all filled with the Holy Ghost and began to speak with other tongues as the Spirit gave them utterance. Nor they were mentioned among the prophets who were in the church of Antioch. He wants to show that we cannot find special signs about Luke and Mark. I think I have to remind you again that these are not necessarily my own views. I'm trying to give you a report. Then he mentions to some arguments, these arguments want to say that we can trust the writings by Luke and Mark. For example, Luke was among the 70 apostles whom Jesus had sent to preach in Judea, because he had claimed that the apostles who had been sent by Jesus were 70. So Luke had to be among them. Or another argument, which says Luke joined Paul in his travel to Macedonia and Rome, and the apostles overwhelmed the believers with the Holy Spirit. Thus, it may be concluded that Luke had written his gospel by the inspiration from the Holy Spirit. And some other arguments, because of shortage of time, I should go on. And Balaaghi makes and raises some question. How can we decide that Luke and Mark had written their gospels in the presence of their masters, Paul and Peter? Or how can we decide that Paul and Peter had seen those gospels? Or how can we decide that the two saints had approved the gospels? Okay, now it's third step turn. If we accept the divinity of what Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John had written, there is another question here. How can we say that the Gospels that we have now today are exactly what Matthew or Mark or Luke or John had written? Are we sure that their books are really nowadays in our hands? And he wants here to say that we need a change of transmission. And it seems that it is not a strong change. It seems that we have a few names in the first generation, second, third, or fourth generations who have narrated the books. And what we can find is just some quotations, some little small quotations from the books. So he wants to hesitate about the chain of transmission. And finally, as the fourth step and final review in my paper from Balaaghi on the canonical Gospels, he goes to the content of the Gospels and gives us at first the criteria. That is, no contradiction, incoherence, or mistake may be found in the Bible as a set of divine books. And then he gives some examples that that we do not expect from a divine book. That is, for example, shortly speaking, because my time is going to be over, he talks about the table of Jesus' descent. As we all know, there are two tables of descent, Jesus' descent in two of canonical Gospels. So he asks how can we describe the difference between these two tables of Jesus' descent? And secondly, he talks about some quotations in the Gospels from the Old Testament that do not exist in the Old Testament. As an example, this is from Matthew. Then was fulfilled that which was spoken by Jeremy the prophet, saying, and they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of him that was valued, whom they of the children of Israel did value, and gave them for the potter's field as the Lord appointed me. And then Balaaghi says that I really looked for these sentences, but I didn't find these sentences in the book of Jeremy, but I found them in Zechariah, the book of Zechariah, with some differences. This is a quotation from Zechariah, which seems that best relates to the previous quotation. I told them, if you think it's best, give me my pay, but if not, keep it. So they paid me 30 pieces of silver. And the Lord said to me, throw it to the potter, the handsome price at which they valued me. So I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw them to the potter at the house of the Lord. Okay, here I want to go to conclusion. First of all, Balaaghi's works show the atmosphere of interfaith discussions or disputes. And around 1 century ago, Muslims want to say that their religion is superior to Christianity, and Christians want to do the same for their own religion. There is no kind of lovely dialogues actually, and no kind of synergy. Then comparative studies seems that were not usual among scholars as it is today. And my third point is that not all of the reviews of Balaaghi are acceptable. Actually, although I'm a Muslim myself, but I think not all of his reviews are good. Some of them are really contemplative, some of them are really thought-provoking, but some of them may be rejected easily, actually. And one of the main failures in his works is methodological failures. In fact, I think some of the methods that he has used in his books, someone can exactly use them to criticize the Quran, while Balaaghi will not accept those failures in the Quran. And it shows that actually some of his reviews should be reviewed and are not acceptable. In fact, my time is over. I have given some examples, some more examples in different parts in my paper, and you may refer to it if you would like to know more. Thank you very much.
Thank you. If you want to, do you want to finish with the last? No. I guess your last slides had the same things in them. We have 2 minutes for clarification questions, and these are only clarification questions. In other words, the answer should be yes or no from our speaker rather than discussion. Anyone a clarification question, or should we move on there? Question that says, do you mean this? I think it would be good for us to move on then, because to not eat any of our time for Mohammed Hossain, if that's good. So thank you very much, Yahya. That was a rich paper, very well informed, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much.
So now we move to Mohammed Hossain, who is a student in Tehran University, and a study of Persian literature. So we're very much looking for, this is perhaps your first international paper, Mohammed Hossain?
Yes, it is.
So I'm sure the first one will be exceptionally interesting.
I hope so. Are my slides shared?
Yes, they are. They're very good.
Okay. At first, thank you, and thank for the hosts of this event. I'm honored to be here, and it gives me great pleasure to have a speech here. The topic that I want to talk about is biblical allusions in Persian literature. Actually, when it comes to this topic, there are many studies about the influence of Bible, the Old Testament, on Persian literature. What about the influence of gospel on Persian literature? It is hard to find any studies. So I decided to focus on this part. In this article, in this presentation, at first I want to show you some themes and examples in Persian literature that are adopted from the Gospel. Actually, these examples have no Quranic parallel, so they are in these terms unique. Then I want to talk about the knowledge of these poets about Christianity and how they relate to the Christian communities, and or whether they have read the gospel or not. And in case they have not read the gospel, I will offer the secondary sources that they have used. For this purpose, actually, I have found 5 examples in the works of 4 poets as a case study. I think we can categorize these examples in 2 groups. The first one are those ideas and themes which explicitly mentioned in the gospel. In this part, I will talk about Ferdowsi and Nasir Khusraw. And the second group are those themes that inspired by the gospel. They are not explicitly mentioned, but it seems that they are inspired by the gospel. At first, I start with first group and Ferdowsi. As you know, his book is Shahnameh, which is written in 10th century, and it means the book of king. And generally in this book, when Ferdowsi talks about Jesus, what he says is based on what Islam has mentioned. But there is a quote, there is a site which explicitly mentioned in the Gospel. Within the chapter Khosrow Parviz, a dialogue takes place between Khorrad, one of the main character, and the Kaiser. And Ferdowsi, on behalf of Khorrad, says, "It is not the truth, and the spirit of Jesus and the spirit of the Jesus bears witness to this. Do you not see what Jesus, son of Mary, said when he was revealing the secrets which had been hidden? He said, if someone takes your shirt, do not contend too fiercely with him, and if he smites you on the cheek, so that your vision darkens because of the blow, do not put yourself into a rage. Close your eyes to him and speak no harsh word." In the Gospel, Jesus says to his disciples, "But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well." As you can see, the similarity between 2 verses is evident. Now talk about Ferdowsi and his knowledge about the gospel. The first point that I have to mention is that the earliest translation of gospel to Persian dates back to the 13th century, when Izzuddin Muhammad translated some fragments of gospel into Persian. And as you can see, it is 300 years after the death of Ferdowsi. And as Noldeke, the German Orientalist, says, Ferdowsi did not acquire the Pahlavi and Arabic languages well enough to use the other resources, in this case, the other translations of Gospel. And moreover, we can't find any other biblical references in his work. So it seems that he has used the other resources. And when we look at the Hadith, we can find the same idea in the book Al-Kafi. The book has been written before the age of Ferdowsi, and this hadith has been mentioned in this book. I have the original version of hadith for those who can read Arabic and understand. The second poet in this part is Nasir Khusraw. I think for those who are not Iranian, is not familiar, but actually he's famous in Iran and he is one of the most influential person in his age. And he lived in 11th century and he's the first one has used one of the most common proverb of Persian literature. He says, if there's spoilage for meat, salt can preserve. When salt spoils, how can it be preserved? And in the gospel, Jesus says to his disciples, you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? As you can see, again, the similarity is obvious. And another example in the work of Nasir Khusraw is that actually in this case, he wants to show his freedom. He wants to show that he's not a kind of person who uses art and poetry for those who are in power, for kings and for princes. He wants to show his freedom and he says, I am not the one to throw the pearl of Persian language at the feet of swine. And when we look at the gospel, we see, do not give dogs what is holy, and do not throw your pearls before swine, lest they trample them underfoot and turn to attack you. And these two verses are similar in the gospel. Now look at the life of Nasir. Now let's look at the life of Nasir Khusraw and talk about his knowledge about Christianity. In his book Safarname, or the Book of Travel, he says that he has traveled to some certain Christian regions, such as Jerusalem, and he lived there for a short time. So we can assume that he has some connection with Christians. Moreover, he says that he has read two books, Zand and Pazand, two holy books of Zoroastrians. It can show that he was interested in reading the holy books of the other religions. And moreover, he mentioned a person named Usta ibn Luha, a Christian scholar, and this one not mentioned in the works of the other poets, and it seems that he has some kind of knowledge about Christianity that is unique. However, he has made some mistakes that can dispute the idea of his knowledge about Christianity. For example, he considered the day Monday as the holy day for Christians. I think anyone for even limited knowledge about Christianity can know that it is not true. Or he considered the word kosti as the belt for Christians, but it's actually a kind of belt worn by Zoroastrians. I think because of these mistakes, we can conclude that maybe he is not aware of Christianity. And what reinforces this idea is that we can find the trace of both examples in Arabic poetry and hadith. The first example has been mentioned in the books Al-Mustazraf bi Kull Fann Al-Mustatraf bi Kull Fann Al-Mustazraf, Al-Bahr Al-Mawrud, and Natayij Al-Afkar. You can find the original version of these Arabic poems, and also this idea has mentioned in Hadith, in the book Al-Amali. Prophet Muhammad says to Abu Dhar the same idea. And about the second example, it is not mentioned in Shīʿī Hadith, but it has mentioned in Sunan ibn Majah when Prophet Muhammad says, one who puts knowledge in the hands of those who do not deserve is like the one who throws gems, jewels, and pearls on the neck of swine. So again, like Ferdowsi, it seems that he has adopted these ideas by using secondary resources, and he has not read the gospel. Now let's talk about the second group of biblical references. The first poet that I have here is Khaqani. I think again, like Nasir Khusraw, is not familiar for non-Iranian, but he is famous in Iran. He says, "O mockery, like Mary, head down, tears roll so pure, like the blood of Jesus." Talking about the Lady Mary is a kind of tradition in Persian literature. But talking about the purity of the blood of Jesus, it's completely unique. No one in Persian literature has talked about it, and I think we can see the same idea in the gospel. For example, in the gospel of John, "But if we walk in the light as he himself in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus, his son, cleanses us from all sin." Or in the chapter Last Supper, "He who eats my flesh and drink my blood has eternal life, and will raise him up on the last day." Now let's talk about Khaqani and his knowledge about Christianity. The first point is his mother was a Christian, and then she converts to Islam. The second point is we can see in his work many Christian elements and some elements of Christian traditions as metaphors and symbols that are not mentioned by the other poets. It's completely unique again. And for example, in the work of Vladimir Minorsky, he has discussed about these elements. Moreover, he prized Andronicus Comnenus, the Byzantine emperor. No one has prized a Christian king in the Persian literature. And it seems that he was interested in this topic. And another point is that when we look at the number of word Isa, Masih, and Masiha, both mean, all of them means Jesus, he has used these words 121, 65, and 50 times. For recognizing better these numbers, Nasir Khusraw, in the work of Nasir Khusraw, these numbers are 9, 4, and 4. It is a way more than Nasir Khusraw, and it seems that he was really interested in Christianity, and he has the Christian background, and moreover, he has mentioned a unique idea that's not mentioned by the other poets and not mentioned in Quran or Islamic texts. And another poet in this part is Rumi. I'm pretty sure that everybody knows him. When he talks about crucifixion of Jesus, he says he emerged to seize the crown, though likeness to Jesus got him the crown of a cross. This verse means that someone who is like the Jesus crucified while wearing a crown. I think this image is kind of Islamic Christian image because uh, he talks about someone likes Jesus, not Jesus himself, which is completely Islamic narration. But he also mentions crown that's not mentioned in Quran, not in the Islamic hadith, and not mentioned by the other Persian poets. And we can see the trace of this crown in Gospel. And the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head and put a purple robe on him. And when we look at his life, we can see some connection between Rumi and Christianity. The first one is he and his father in year 1228 immigrated to Konya in current Turkey, and it was the city in Roman Empire, and he lived there for more than 2 decades. So it is reasonable that we assume that he has some connection with Christians in Roman Empire in Konya. Moreover, when we look at his work, Mathnavi, we see that he has talked about many different topics related to Jesus. He talks about Jesus when he speaks in cradle. He talks about virginity of Lady Mary. He talks about the donkey of Jesus, his miracles, like walking on the water or healing people. He's a person who has talked about Jesus more than the other poets, except maybe Khagani. And another point is he has talked about the lawfulness of the wine at the age of Christ. Again, this idea is not mentioned in the Quran, and it's kind of against the Islamic teachings, and nobody in Persian literature has mentioned it. So it seems that he has some kind of knowledge about Christianity, and because of this knowledge, he was able to create some new ideas and themes that are completely unique. So at the conclusion and actually summarization, I have to say that there are 2 types of biblical references in Persian literature. The first is those references that are explicitly mentioned in the gospel. Poets adopted these verses word for word. These poets are not aware of Christianity and they have used secondary resources. And the second type of biblical reference is about those poets that were aware of Christianity, or maybe they have read the gospel, and because of this knowledge, they have created unique ideas in Persian literature which have no parallels. Thanks you for your attention and for having me. I'm ready for questions.
Thank you, Mohammed Hossain. That was fabulous. Very, very clear, very thorough, and very interesting. So, are there any clarification questions from anyone? There is from Caroline Seed. So.
Yes, Mohammed, thank you very much for that. I was fascinated when I had a brief chat with you on Monday, and you've really delivered.
Thank you.
I just wanted to clarify that your quote that you used for the purity of the blood of Jesus, it's not from the Gospel of John, but it's from 1 John, the first epistle of John. So you might just want to correct that.
Oh, I didn't know. Thank for your point. I'm gonna.
Just because we are working on it at the moment, so we know. Thank you.
Thank you for your best point.
Martin has a clarification question.
I'm not sure if it's clarification. Thank you very much, Mohammed. That was indeed very clear. I just wondered if you or the other people listening knew of Kenneth Thomas's book, A Restless Search, which is a history of Persian Bible translations. I mean, it's in line with what you said. It gives some very early, some background on fragments and bits and pieces that occurred earlier on. But it's a very careful work, quite new. So I just wanted to mention it for interest, but you may well know it yourself. Kenneth Thomas. That's all.
Okay, actually, it's not a question, and thank you for your comment.
Do you think you could put it on the chat, Martin, so that we catch the You don't have to do the full publisher reference, but the title and Kenneth Thomas, History of Persian. Any others? If there's no more clarification, there doesn't have to be any more clarification questions. What I suggest we do as a little bit alternative, before we hear Dennis, I suggest that we have 1 minute of stretching exercise so that we can wake up our brains and be ready for the third feast to be prepared for us. So to make the most of it, I suggest we just give 1 minute for sort of stretch and stand. This is my own needs as well as yours.
Actually.
This is the power of being given the chair. Dennis, I hope that's going to mean that we're going to get even more from your talk. I'm looking forward to it very much. I'm interested that you're a Dominican friar, is that right? Based in Berlin, frequent traveler and fascinated, I suspect, by other cultures and particularly Iranian culture, as well as the things you're going to show in the paper. I'll hand it over to you, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Danny, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. Salam. Yeah, I want to thank you, the organizers, of course, for this opportunity, and and I thank you for your interest in Persian translations of the Gospels. So the title of my paper today is Shīʿī, the Muslim Translation and Interpretation of the Gospels from Early 19th Century Iran by Muhammad Baqir Salmasi. And I want to start to give you a broader context, a broader picture on the history of Persian translations of the Bible. So I will share my screen, and I hope that will work. Just a second. Where is it? No. I think I have to, I don't know. Okay. Okay, there we are, right? Okay. So for centuries, Persian, or Standard New Persian, was the lingua franca of a vast region in Southwest Asia, extending from the Caucasus and Mesopotamia in the west, across the Iranian plateau, Central Asia, Afghanistan, and northern India, up to Bengal in the east. Jews and Christians, but also Muslims, as well as missionaries from Europe, translated the Hebrew Bible, or the Old Testament, and the New Testament into Persian. So I'm always talking about New Persian, so the standard Persian today. In contrast to the growing field of the study of Arabic translations of the Bible, translations of biblical books into Persian have been significantly less studied. A comprehensive history of the Bible in Persian has not yet been written. Although studies of individual versions and manuscripts exist, the systematic study based on a comparative analysis of the hundreds of extant copies of biblical books in Persian translation still remains a desideratum. And since you mentioned earlier Kenneth Thomas' book, A Restless Church, unfortunately he does not include studies on manuscripts, and he also does not include publications in Italian, French, and other European languages. So that's why it's not, although it was recently published, it does not include, I would say, the research done on Persian translations of the Bible, unfortunately. Unlike in Arabic Bible studies, Persian Bible manuscripts have not yet been classified. Key questions on the production, consumption, and the ways of transmission of the extant translations, including possible dependencies between them, are still unanswered. The earliest running translations of biblical books into Persian date back at least to the 13th and 14th centuries. So here it's group 1. And they were made by indigenous Jews and Christians for internal consumption, and thus written in Hebrew script, known as Judeo-Persian, and Syriac script. In early modern times, Armenians, Georgians, and perhaps more other Christians also translated the Gospels into Persian, however, writing in their own accustomed alphabets. Hence, these translations were inaccessible to Muslim readers who, generally speaking, were unfamiliar with scripts other than Perso-Arabic. Despite the shift of Persian reading Christians and perhaps also Jews to the use of the Arabic script in the Middle Islamic period, there is no indication, at least at the current state of research, that Persian Bible translations by Jews and Christians transcended denominational boundaries. Unlike in the case of Arabic translations, we do not have evidence for a similar cross-mobility of Persian Bible translations between religious communities until the early modern period. Muslim scholars in Persianate societies began to study the Bible in Persian following the arrival of Catholic missionaries, first in India and then in Iran, from the late 16th century onwards. So that's group 3. The missionaries reworked earlier Persian translations and partially harmonized them with the text of the Latin Vulgate, the official version of the Bible in the Catholic Church since the Council of Trent. They also produced fresh new translations into Persian for the Mughal and Safavid court and discussed the Gospels with Muslim scholars for missionary purposes. When Protestant missionaries arrived in India, mainly Anglicans, and Iran in the 18th and 19th centuries, they in turn translated from the officially recognized versions of the Bible of their churches, such as the King James Bible, or directly from the original text. Besides Jewish and Christian translators, Muslim scholars and court historians also translated biblical books into Persian. That's group 4. They were often commissioned by Muslim rulers and officials, especially Mughal emperors, Safavid Shahs, and Qajar Shahs. And as a rule, these translations were made from earlier Arabic translations and are often second, third, or even fourth translations of biblical books. 2 translations of the Gospels are especially noteworthy. First, Shah Sultan Hussein, the last Safavid ruler of Iran, commissioned in the late 17th century Mir Muhammad Baqir Khatunabadi, a high-ranking Shiite jurist, and the Mullah Bashi, the chief of religious scholars, to translate and annotate the Gospels in Persian. He translated from the earliest printed Arabic Gospels that was printed in Rome in 1591. But there's also evidence that Khatunabadi consulted other Arabic translations, perhaps the Biblia Sacra Arabica. He completed his Persian translation in 1697, including extensive marginal glosses on the Gospel text. And Khatunabadi's gloss translation was edited by Rasul Ja'farian in 1996. And perhaps a short note to Muhammad Hossain. Well, I suggest you might want to check Khatunabadi's translation, because he comments a lot on the apostles and some of the arguments. This was Yahya. Sorry. Some of your arguments sound on Balaaghi sound familiar from Khatunabadi. So second, Nadir Shah of Shar initiated half a century later an ambitious interreligious translation enterprise to translate the Hebrew Bible, the New Testament, and the Quran into Persian. He commissioned, among other biblical books, a translation of the Gospels, which was made by a joint commission of Muslim scholars, among them the court historian of the Shah, Mahdi Khan Asturabadi, but also Armenians and Catholic missionaries. The translation was presented to Nadir Shah in 1741. It was also made from an Arabic Vorlage, namely the Biblia Sacra Arabica, a more accurate Arabic rendering of the Vulgate printed by the Vatican between 1671 and 1673. And this so-called Nadir Shahi Gospel was also edited by Rasul Ja'farian in 2009. Now, another translation that has so far escaped scholarly attention and on which I wish to focus today was made by a little-known Shiite scholar called Muhammad Baqir ibn Abd al-Karim Salmasi. He completed his translation in about 1811 in the midst of the First Russo-Persian War in the Caucasus. The translation still remains in manuscript form and has not been studied until now. So here we have a slide of the opening folio, just to give you an impression of the manuscripts. And this is the beginning of the Gospel of John. And if you do read, Perso-Arabic script, you can see in the second line from the bottom that it is the Christian Basmala. So obviously the translator, that's not only the Gospel of John, but also in the other Gospels, copied the Basmala from his Vorlage. And it says, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, God is one. That just a note on the idea that it's a quite literal translation that keeps close to the Vorlage, but I'll come to that later. The complete text is extant in a manuscript dated, the one we see now, dated 1811 and preserved today in a library in Rome, Iran. Another copy, however fragmentary, is dated 4 decades later and held by a library in Tehran with excerpts from the Gospel of John, chapter 14 and 16. Both manuscripts contain an extensive introduction to the Gospels by Muhammad Baqir Salmasi. The Vorlage of the translation is not entirely clear. there is evidence that the translator translated from the Arabic, well, that's pretty sure actually, as it is clear from the syntax and the lexis and the Arabicized vocabulary that he uses. And his Vorlage was probably the already mentioned Biblia Sacra Arabica, and perhaps another Arabic version that still remains to be identified. The translator's approach to the gospel is comparatively literal, including the use of expressions such as Son of God, Esar Khoda, Kingdom of my Father, Malakute Pedaram, and so on. On the other hand, Saï-Morsi does translate, for instance, poll tax with jizya, but such terms might reflect an Islamicate, not necessarily Islamic milieu of the Arabic Vorlage. And after Andrew's talk, I checked actually the poll tax, and so I became aware that he also uses jizya. And for instance, in the Biblia Sacra Arabica, it's not jizya, it's dirham. So this might also suggest that the term jizya comes from a different Arabic Vorlage, not only the Biblia Sacra Arabica. So he used maybe 2 or more Arabic translations. And now, interestingly, certain verses in Latin and Syriac also appear in our translation. So it's not only, he does not only give the Persian translation, but some verses are in Latin and Syriac, especially from John chapter 14, as well as portions from the chapters 15 and 16, also of John. And these verses are given in Latin and Syriac, but transcribed into the Perso-Arabic alphabet, and accompanied by an interlinear translation into Persian, as well as, and this is true for the Latin and also for the Syriac. And here we have an example. Well, that's the slide. This is a slide, a folio of the manuscript that presents a portion of the Gospel of John. So this is chapter 14, and we have here, it's chapter 14, the first 1.5 verses. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house there are many dwelling places. And I picked this as an example. So on the top, you see in red ink, with inside the circle, that chapter 14 is indicated, by the way, in Arabic. That's the case for all chapter divisions. And on the right-hand side, on the margin, it says it's indicated that now the Latin starts. And we see in, and by the way, the chapter division is also according to the Vulgate. And below the chapter 14 line, we have in black ink the Latin verse transcribed in Perso-Arabic script, and in the interlinear space in red ink the Persian translation, word for word translation. So this phenomenon of let's say biblical verses in languages other, or alleged Christian languages other than Persian, is not uncommon to Persian translations of Christian and Jewish scriptures. It does not necessarily mean, so there are other examples, so it does not necessarily mean that the translator was acquainted with Latin and Syriac, or very often we also have Hebrew. In this case, the translator rather quotes biblical verses in the languages used by Christians to emphasize his authority as a translator and to authenticate his translation towards a Muslim audience. We might speculate that Sabbagchi relied on the assistance of missionaries to read and transcribe the Latin and Syriac verses into Perso-Arabic script, but there is no evidence for this. But in the introduction, he says, he relates that he had debates and disputations with Russian priests. So he interacted with priests, and well, I mean, I don't know if Russian priests could read Latin. I don't know, maybe. So this would be a possibility to think about more, that those contacts were also an opportunity for Sabbagchi to ask them for the transcription of verses. But of course, he could also have copied the transcribed verses from another source. This would also be a possibility. So, what is the historical context of Sabbagchi's Gospel translation? The translation was made at the request of the Qajar heir apparent Abbas Mirza, who died in 1833. His vizier, Mirza Muhammad Isa ibn Mirza Muhammad Hassan al-Husseini Farahani, better known as Mirza Isa Qa'im Maqam, assisted Sabbagchi. The translation was dedicated to Abbas Mirza's father, Fath Ali Shah, the well-known Qajar Shah. There is no indication whether the translation was actually read out to Abbas Mirza, but there is evidence that the Qajar heir apparent had an interest in the Christian and Jewish scriptures. During the same period, Abbas Mirza and his vizier, Mirza Isa Qa'im Maqam, also commissioned a partial translation with a commentary on the Pentateuch. And this was made by a Shīʿī scholar called Zayn al-Abidin ibn Muhammad, and completed in Qazimain near Baghdad in 1811, the same year of Sabbagchi's translation of the Gospels. And there has been a recent dissertation on this commentary on the Pentateuch by Dr. Aghoye Evozi from the Danishgah Adyan Mazaheb in Rome. During the early 19th century, European powers, mainly the United Kingdom and Russia, became directly involved in Iranian affairs. With its colonial expansion, Russia claimed territories in the Caucasus, and the military confrontation with Qajar Iran became inevitable. During the following war, from 1804 until 1813, Abbas Mirza was directly involved as governor of Azerbaijan in the war against Russia. These wider political circumstances are reflected in the introduction to our translation, when Sabbagchi accuses the Russians of initiating religious riots. So he calls it Fitneye Ta'ifeye Rusiya. And he also enumerates the atrocities of Russian occupation. Moreover, Sabbagchi's prologue, written in Arabic, sets a polemical tone and frames his translation of the Gospels within a religious political agenda. It opens with the well-known verse from the Surat al-Ikhlas, "He neither begets nor is born," often interpreted in an anti-Trinitarian sense in Muslim writings. The Prophet Muhammad is called seal of the laws and religions. Well, I skipped the Arabic. And the one who replaces the other scriptures by the Quran. So there is a direct link between the presentation of the Sabbagchi's translation of the Gospels and and of course Muslim doctrine on the Prophet, And he is also described as the one who's knowledgeable about all books in every tongue. And in this context, there are two expressions quoted. So we have the very famous Hebrew expression bim'ot me'ot from Genesis 17, verse 20, which presents the abundance of the exceedingly numerous tribes. But in this case, it's also interpreted as a reference to Muhammad, which is very frequent. And then, of course, the figure of the Paraclete from the Gospel of John is also quoted. And these two expressions are perhaps the most common biblical references quoted by Muslim authors as references to Muhammad. And besides Muhammad, who's also who's called the one dedicated to the guidance of the nations and the world, also Ali is referenced, Imam Ali, and he's mentioned as presented as the one mentioned in the Hebrew Bible and the Gospels as Elijah, and this is also a very common reference. And then further on, the translator and commentator elaborates on the Paraclete, and he identifies the Paraclete again with the Prophet Muhammad, and claiming that Jesus predicted Muhammad's mission in the Gospels. And now it's interesting to see that the chapters that are given in Latin and Syriac from the Gospel of John are exactly the chapters that talk about the Paraclete. So the entire emphasis of the translation is actually the presentation of Muhammad as the Paraclete, and this might be also the historical frame why this might be a reason why this translation was made, and what was the purpose and its use for a Muslim audience. What we do not find is a specific Shiite argument throughout the introduction. So it is not about substantiating Shiite doctrine, such as on the Imams, Imamology, and so on and so forth. So it's very much all about Muhammad and identifying Muhammad as the Paraclete. So to conclude, what was the purpose of the translation? So we know that the translation was apparently made for the Qajar heir apparent Abbas Mirza and his vizier who assisted the translator, and perhaps also for a wider Muslim audience. So it was apparently to strengthen the identity of the Shiite community and also to substantiate Muslim doctrine. But I would also think of the translation, including the commentary, including the introduction, as an attempt to act against Russian missionaries, who, as I said, are also mentioned. And we might think of the missionaries attempting to proselytize among Muslims, or that they were perceived as representatives of Russian occupation and Russian imperialism. So this seems to me another track that has to be followed up on. So this is something I still want to work on. And maybe a last two sentences about a possible impact of the translation. I do not think that this translation had a huge impact compared to the Nader Shahi translation of the Gospels or Khotun Abadi's translation of the Gospels, because we only have one complete manuscript, at least until now, that has been identified until now. And there is no evidence from the manuscript that other Shiite scholars had studied it and left notes on the margins, for instance. In contrast to Khatun al-Badi's translation, which was copied and reproduced and disseminated among Shiite scholars, and there we also have copies with comments on the margins. So so thank you, and I'll leave it. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Dennis. That was incredibly scholarly and well informed. Are there any clarification questions before we move to the big ideas before us? We have quite a what can I say, a well-qualified collection of listeners who are well informed on all these papers. The clarification questions before we move to the discussion or raising of issues.
Yes, I have two small linguistic things. Can I go ahead?
Yes, please do.
Firstly, in the manuscript that you showed us, the Latin word divisions were all strange. Does that suggest that the Latin was actually read out to the scribe and then it was written down from hearing rather than from a Latin manuscript?
Yes, that's well possible. The other possibility would be, well, that's not uncommon also when it comes to Hebrew quotations. Well, either it was, the verse was read out to the one who copied it, who actually penned it on paper, or he copied it in a way that not in a good way, that he came to split up words. That's also a possibility. I mean, we don't know if this is if this is actually the manuscript in Sabbagchi's hand. It could be also the fault of the scribe who copied it, or so there are all sorts of possibilities.
Because it seems quite important for our understanding of somebody's real engagement with a sacred text to know whether they are actually capable of reading the script, whether they are capable of reading Roman script or Hebrew script. That would make a difference to their level of engagement with it. The other question was about Ma'od that you mentioned. I had assumed that and some of these other claimed references to Muhammad in biblical writings were quite modern. So do you know anything about the history of the idea that Genesis 17:2 has that connection? When do you think it first came?
Yeah.
Well, how old is it?
That's very, very old. That's nothing modern or early modern.
Okay.
That's if you ask the colleagues who work on Arabic manuscripts, they will have something to say that's very common. Also, I think this already appears in the Shiite context. This already appears in Ibn Babawai's writings, Sheikh As-Saduq's writings. So this is 13th century, but he was certainly not the first one who did it.
Thank you very much. It's just a very unusual reading for anybody who knows Arabic and Hebrew.
Yeah.
To reread it that way. It just doesn't. There are some kind of things like that seem reasonable. Even the Paraclete one seems maybe reasonable, understandable why somebody would understand it that way. But to reread Maud that way seems very surprising. Maybe
if I may add just one sentence. The fact, I mean, it's interesting that Sabbagchi attempts to authenticate the Gospels through Latin and Syriac, right? So the question here is, did he not know that the Gospels were originally written in Greek? So that because that would have authenticated the Gospels and supported his point even more? Or was it not relevant because he was addressing, let's say, Catholic missionaries and Eastern Christians? Then it would make sense that he quotes from the Vulgate and that he quotes from the Shīʿī. So that's another question.
And could I come in on that, Danny, please?
Yes, go for it. Go for it. Andrew, you can avoid the raising a blue hand, but it'd be great if other people. So Andrew first, and then please do. Now is the time to put your blue hand in the participants thing to line yourself up to questions on Balaaghi and his response to the scriptures and to these different poets and their 11th century, 12th century connections to Christian things, and then this much later translation of the scriptures eventually to find out about and to stand out against Russian and British imperialism. So fascinating, 3 papers. Blue hands, please, and over to Andrew.
Thank you. I just wanted to take up that last point that Dennis was discussing. It does seem extremely odd that these editions in this translation are quoting and transcribing the Latin and the Syriac. Why on earth would someone do that if they were trying to combat the teachings of Russians, as you point out? It would be the Russian priests who would value the Greek text, particularly the Byzantine text, and I can't see any reference to Latin or Syriac being much use in combating them. And at the same time, if you were discussing presumably with a Catholic missionary, it will be very little use quoting the Syriac text to him, because that would not be canonical. It's a different version. So this really does raise some interesting questions, and I hope you are able to find out a little bit more about it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. I mean, I don't have an answer to these questions, but certainly, yeah, we have to ask them. And yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's because the Latin is explicable because he had the Latin Vulgate. Sorry, the Biblia Sacra Arabica at hand, which is an Arabic translation of the Vulgate. Maybe that's a hint for the Syriac. I really don't know, but I'm also not familiar with the Orthodox Church, like with the Russian Orthodox Church. So if they value this the Shīʿī in any way, or I don't know.
Fascinating. I can see one blue hand. I shall encourage other blue hands. Please line your hands up. But Martin's blue hand is well seen. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you, Dennis, very much. I just wondered if you had knowledge of, or else an intuition that there are other isolated manuscripts like this around. I mean, you've drawn our attention to this one, which presumably was, I don't know if you mentioned when it was found, or maybe if you're the discoverer in a library or an archive somewhere. But what's your sense of the wider situation with things like this?
I mean, I can only estimate the number of manuscripts, not only of the Gospels, but also of the Hebrew Bible that exist in Persian. But because nobody has worked on them in a extensive way, we just do not know. I mean, if you usually, even in European libraries, you find copies of Persian translations of biblical books, but also in Iran, also in India, also in other libraries in the Holy Land, in Lebanon, I would say, I mean, you have like a substantial number, not as substantial as Arabic manuscripts of biblical books, but you do have a substantial number of Persian manuscripts, and they have not been brought together and studied together. So that's why it's very hard to say something about the wider context.
So presumably, how many of those may or may not be by a Muslim wouldn't really be known at the moment very much. I mean, you've drawn attention to this, which was done by a Muslim translator. That, I assume, is relatively unusual amongst the ones you're referring to? Or
no,
not
I mean, no. I mean, I presented before, so let's say I talked about 3 Muslim translations of the Gospels by a Muslim translator, but I do not think that these are maybe the 3 most famous ones, but I do not think that it's limited to 3. At least from my, if you read in travelogues and chronicles of the time of the early modern period, you do find references to Muslims who are translating the Gospels, but this information has not been brought together with the actual manuscripts that have survived or come down to us. So that's actually another challenge to bring the study of the manuscripts and the study of the wider historical context together, and to identify the translators.
Sure, thank you. And just quickly, I can't remember if you said where this manuscript was located or where it was found.
Well, the fragment is in Tehran, and
oh, yes.
The complete copy is in Rome.
Sorry, yes, you did say that. Thank you.
Can I encourage questions, particularly for Yahya and Mohammed Hossain? Dennis is well loved, but we've had all the questions have gone to Dennis. And also I noticed that so far it's been a male discussion, which of course men are well loved, but they only represent half of the human race. So the questions to Yahya and Mohammed Hossain are particularly welcome, and particularly from the fairer half of the humanity.
Danny, I have a question from Dennis. May I ask?
Go for it, please.
Okay, thank you. I think, Dennis, you talked about the goal of translating Bible into Persian. Of course, I lost my connection for some seconds, and I couldn't get what you said. But I have a question here. That is, if we want to talk about scholars, Islamic scholars who need to read Bible, you know, it was not usual among Islamic scholars to read necessarily Persian translations. They used to read Arabic translations. So it seems that these books are not translated for scholars. Who do you think were the audience for these translations?
You mean this particular translation by Sabbagchi, or in general?
First of all, Sabbagchi, and secondly, other translations.
Okay, well, I think Sabbagchi translated for Abbas Mirza, because it was commissioned. So the Abbas Mirza, or the Wazir, had requested the translation. Not only this one, but also the translation of the Pentateuch and the commentary on the Pentateuch. So Abbas Mirza had an interest in it. I mean, we do not know. I mean, this is also maybe a common topos of a ruler who wants to be knowledgeable about all the religions in his empire, let's say. So that's what we find with the Mughal emperors. That's what we see with Shah Abbas. That's what we see with Sultan Hussein. What we see with
Nadir Shah, you said Nadir Shah.
Yes. So, but then again, we do not know, was it a serious interest? I mean, what happened with these translations once they were done? I mean, were they read out to the ruler, to the Shah, or to Abbas Mirza, or not? You know, and what was the reaction to it? You know, so it could be also part of a, let's say, self picturing of a ruler that commissions translations, you know, to accumulate knowledge, to show that you know, he wants to learn about religions, because after all, I mean, of course, he is a Muslim ruler, and also Shah Abbas always stayed a Shiite ruler, although there were rumors that he was also interested to convert to Christianity, but he this was a political move also. You know? So yeah.
Thank you. Good idea. Thank you.
I have also a question for you.
Oh my God.
May I go ahead?
You may. It'll be Shīʿī
Okay.
after yourself. We're now lining up the blue hands, so please get your blue hands in.
Where's my blue hand? Okay.
That's
No,
okay. No,
okay.
You can go, Dennis. There's a...
Okay. Balaaghi, I mean, the argument of by Balaaghi, there's a continuity to it. If you look at the Muslim argument on the Gospels, and I was wondering, what was his access to the Gospels? I mean, I think you did not, Yahya, you did not mention how he read and studied the Gospel, so that would be interesting. And yeah, and is there a way to identify the Persian or Arabic translation that he used, or?
Yes, a very good question. Actually, the outstanding point about Balaaghi is that he knew Arabic, Persian, English, and Hebrew. And it was not usual among Islamic scholars to know Hebrew, at least, and also English. But when you study the biography of Balaaghi, you find that he tried to learn Hebrew from some Jews in Iraq, and he tried a lot, attempted a lot to learn Hebrew. And when you study his books, you find out that in some places he criticizes the translations, whether into Arabic or Persian, and he goes through the Hebrew texts in the Old Testament, and quotes the Hebrew sentences and corrects the translations. So it seems to me that although I didn't find anything completely in that he had described what manuscripts he had studied, but it seems that he had access both to original manuscripts, in Hebrew, in English, or in Persian and Arabic. Of course, I didn't find, at least I can't remember any quotations in English, but quotations in Hebrew you can find in his books.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you. And Shīʿī has a question from Copenhagen.
Yes, thank you. My question is to Yahya, but it's actually a question that I would love to hear the other two presenters, Dennis and Muhammad Hossain, to reply to as well from their own perspective if they have comments to make. So Thank you, Yahya. It was a really fascinating presentation of Balaaghi's approach to the gospel. And what really interested me, mostly interested me, what was you said at the end, where you said that actually you don't necessarily agree with some of his arguments, and you think that so where your own voice came in. That was for me, when I actually wanted to listen to another presentation by you, where you would then talk about how this does to your own understanding of the gospel, or how reading Balaaghi and engaging with him has changed anything in your own work. And now I don't know much about your own work, so it would be really nice if you could tell us a little bit more about the work that you're doing in the bigger picture. Are you actually reading the Gospels yourself? Are you a scholar of biblical material? Or if yes, then how your reading of Balaaghi's reading of the Gospels has changed anything in your own reading of the Gospels, if that makes sense. And then I would ask the same question of the other two presenters. What has your research here done for your own understanding of the Gospels? Has that changed anything, or any surprises, or any new directions? Thank you.
Thank you, Shireen. Nice question, and of course a hard question it is, because it's about myself. But I'm not actually a scholar of the Bible. I like to study, and I study the Bible. Sometimes I talk about it for my students in university, but really I'm not a scholar. But actually the main idea that I made at the end was that some methods used by Balaaghi is not actually reasonable. I mean, for example, let me give you an example. For example, you can find a sentence from one of the books and another sentence from another book, and then say that these two sentences are opposite each other. So there is a kind of contradiction there, and this is a failure in the book. But now in our methodological developments nowadays, we usually try to watch the context, and we try to find a way that we withdraw the contradiction. Actually, Balaaghi reviews are completely biased, and what I learned for myself is to try not to be biased and really read the Gospels without judging from the first. I can judge at the end maybe, but not before starting to study. This is the main idea that I think if someone really wants to criticize a book, he or she should not be biased, and the conclusion should not be determined at the first. You should conclude at the end. This is what I learned from studying Balaaghi's works. Of course, I said that some of his points are really thought-provoking and needs to be studied more. And I'm not actually working nowadays. I'm not working on a bigger project in comparative study. It is a new field actually for me, because I got my PhD in philosophy of religion, but I'm really interested in comparative studies, and I hope I can continue more and more. Thank you.
Maybe we could hear the same from Yahya. Shireen's question about what you, if this has changed anything of your opinions in your research. Sorry, Mohammed Hossain. Yahya's already answered. And sorry, I was trying to bring in Mohammed Hossain into. You're muted, Mohammed Hossain.
Now it's better. Actually, about the first question, that what I am doing, actually I'm at the beginning of the researching journey, and what I am interested in is languages and linguistics, and also applying linguistical stuffs on holy books, both Quran and the Bible. And you know, about the languages, there is, I think, this sentence is from Goethe, the German poet. He says that those who know nothing of foreign languages know nothing of their own. I think it goes the same for religions. So I am interested to study comparative, and I think for understanding even Quran, understanding Bible could be really helpful. But what I could do in this step was what I have done, and I try to do some comparative study about what I knew in Persian literature and about the gospel.
Very good. Thank you.
Anytime.
I'm. Are there other questions coming from us?
Danny, I have a question from Mohammed Hossain. If may I ask?
Of course.
Of course, go ahead.
Did you limit your work on a defined period of history? I mean, Persian literature. You talked about Nasir Khusraw, Khaqani. You talked about Ferdowsi. Did you have any limitations or not?
And now I'm limited because of my knowledge, but I think it's a kind of stepping stone for me. And what I want to do is applying linguistical stuff, using literature and literary criticism as a tool to study holy books. Not, my topic is not exactly just Persian literature, but yes, I study now Persian literature. But in future, yes, I want to expand the area of studies.
Thank you.
Anytime.
Yeah.
If we have a bit of time, can I ask the same question from Dennis? If nobody else, if you can't see any more hands in your...
I can't see any more hands. I was going to catch it. I saw a few people moving in their chairs, so I was going to jump on them, but I think you've saved them. So don't move in your chair, otherwise I shall ask you a question from Dennis.
Yeah, it was the same question. What has your research done for your own reading of the gospel, if anything?
Yeah, thank you, Shīʿī. Yeah, well, I mean, this particular translation of the Gospels has brought me to consider the historical context more, in the sense that, I mean, I was not aware that the presence of a foreign power, you know, makes people also thinking about how to frame a gospel translation in a political context, if I may say so. Because before, all the other translations that I know are more, are more like framed by a theological discussion, and of course there are debates with missionaries and travelers from Europe, but this in the 19th century I find very unique and interesting to see what is the implication of imperialism, and what does it have to do with Bible translation.
fascinating. That's great. Thank you.
Well, we don't have to fulfill our last 10 minutes. We can enjoy an early lunch, but this is the, if there is any more questions.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Yeah, I'm Farhad. Just sorry. I asked maybe a question about Muhammad Hossain because I thought Dr. Sabbagchi was asking that why did you consciously limited your search to classical Persian poets for your talk, avoiding any modern or, for example, more recent poets for regarding, or what was your criteria that you choose only those poets for your talk?
Actually, because I was discovering the origin of some themes, I have to research on classical poets. For example, about the proverb, I have to see the first one who has used this proverb, or for the other themes.
So you mean you want to be sure they are influenced directly by Gospels, not by second literature. So there was, yeah, okay. You're more reasonable to limit them. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
There's nothing coming forth from us. That's not because this has not been an interesting session at all. I see a hand. Thank you for that hand. Mazie, please, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Well, I got a question from Muhammad Hossain, and this is out of my range of studying, so I had doubts about asking it, but I heard you saying that when Khaqani was talking about Jesus Christ, he used the words Masih, Masiha, and then I thought that maybe he didn't know that Messiah was a word used by both Jewish and Christian scholars in a wider range of sense. So this is my question. Do you detect that the word Messiah is being used by Muslim poets in this wider range of sense, or just it is used just only for Jesus Christ?
I think because of the limitation of poem in terms of rhyme, people use Masih and Masiha alternatively, and both of them mean the same. It's not a distinction between Masih and Masiha in Persian poetry.
So that means that they don't recognize that the word Messiah was used by Semitic literature also.
Actually, I don't know the answer of this question, but I think the reason that they use these words is not because of the different meaning of Masih and Masiha, is because the rhyme and the limitation of poem.
Okay. Yeah, this is a question we have to get an answer for, I think.
Yes, of course.
Thank you. And by the way, it was a very interesting presentation from you. Thank you.
Thanks you. I'm glad that you like it.
We have a question from Farhad, and this might be the last question, unless we get another blue hand coming up.
Yes, I can't. I mean, my camera is not working, so I can't show a blue hand. Yes, this is not Bulu. I'm using somebody else's computer.
Julie,
yes, yeah.
Please do speak, Julie.
May I ask a question? It's not really related to the papers presented, but I'm just wondering if, and I'm, it's a question addressed to all of those experts on Iranian studies, or to, is there anything in the studies that you have made that can explain the wave of conversions of Iranian to Christianity at this time?
That's an interesting question. That could be to Yahya or Dennis or Mohammed Hossain.
Or even to Mars, yeah. Like anybody who can answer that question.
Sorry, I didn't hear your last sentence. Would you repeat it, please?
Yes. I'm just wondering if there is anything that if you have found out anything in your studies, in your research, that can explain the wave of conversion of, the wave of, it's conversion out of Islam to Christianity, specifically in Iran at this time.
Yes, the wave is getting bigger, I think, because of the political situation in Iran. There is unsatisfactory in Muslim citizens, so they think it is caused by Islamic thoughts, radical Islamic thoughts. So they are, yes, there is increasing conversion to Christianity in Iran right now.
So you are saying that it is only caused by the political situation then?
No.
It's not a discovery, or it's not, people are not discovering the gospel, or are they researching the gospel? Are they reading the gospels at this time? Or are they just fed up with the political situation?
I think the political situation is the biggest factor, but I can't have a scientific opinion on the other indexes and criteria that you talked about. I don't have any numbers or analysis on numbers, so I can't tell. But what I sense is the growing unsatisfaction that causes them to convert.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have Farhad's hand has been raised, so I think Farhad, you'll have the 1 minute for your question, which might be a thought or a question.
Mostly maybe kind of comment. I didn't completely hear it, but about the issue of whether going to the Bible and looking kind of regarding the mentioning of Prophet Muhammad in polemical debates, and I think one of the questioners audience said that maybe this is late event, and then Dennis answered, you see the tracing Ibn Bawayh too, but even earlier, this mutual polemical debate started really 2nd century, even not early 2nd century Islamic, because they start to be, especially when Abbasid came in power, the transition in around 750, the debates was very common. And even in the talk I have, I said there is a section 72, which you can find in the appendix of my paper, which I didn't discuss it. That clearly is such a thing. You see traces of biblical material in the advice of God to Jesus regarding the prophecy of future prophet. For example, the issue of the persons who ride on donkey or person who ride on red camel, the donkey is Jesus, red camel is Prophet Muhammad. In newer, more recent publications, these are plural, but people have shown if you go earlier manuscript, the word wasn't plural, it was singular. So one camel and rider and donkey rider. So this was there. I'm saying these debates. So it means people were looking to other translations or other stuff much earlier, really you see trace, because the hadith I said was really 2nd century. So at least whatever his origin was around 2nd century. Just I would say it's very early if you looked at it, and that's the interest. Even you see Musnad Ahmad Hanbal, they clearly they have gone to the New Testament. I don't know which translation, how they got it. Maybe some people translated for them to Arabic, because then Sidney Griffiths says there was no translation till 10th century. So we are talking about 8th, but that's the case. Just I want to mention.
Thank you, Farhad. I think it's now 1 o'clock, so we have to fulfill all righteousness and say goodbye. But I think we should thank Dennis and Yahya and Mohammed Hossain for their excellent papers and for everyone for contributing. So thank you very much. And see you later.